The silence in the car was a thick, warm blanket, broken only by the hypnotic hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional, soft sigh of the air conditioning. Outside, the world had flattened into a watercolor painting of muted greens and browns, a seemingly endless expanse of farmland punctuated by the occasional skeletal remains of a long-dead barn. We'd been driving for 6 hours, my mother and I, on a pilgrimage of sorts to see my grandmother, a journey that had become an annual tradition since my father's passing. It was a trip suspended in time, a bubble of shared history rolling down the interstate. My mother's hands, delicate yet capable, rested at 10 and 2 on the leather-clad steering wheel. A faint scent of her perfume, the same floral fragrance she'd worn for decades, mingled with the smell of stale coffee from our last stop. She was lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the ribbon of road ahead, her profile a familiar and comforting landscape of its own. I watched the way the late afternoon sun caught the few strands of silver in her otherwise dark hair, turning them to filaments of light. In these quiet moments, she wasn't just Mom, the organizer, the worrier, the keeper of lists. She was Eleanor, a woman with a life that stretched far beyond the boundaries of my existence, a life filled with chapters I had only ever read the summaries of. I was drifting in that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep, lulled by the monotony, when the memory surfaced. It wasn't a conscious thought, more a ghost of a feeling, a flicker of a long-forgotten image from my childhood. A dusty road, not unlike the ones we were passing, the feeling of smallness, and a secret, whispered in the dark. The urge to bridge the quiet, to connect with the woman she was before I knew her, became overwhelming. Shifting in my seat, I unbuckled my seatbelt just enough to twist my body towards her. The soft click of the release seemed loud in the quiet car. I leaned in close, my shoulder pressing against the cool leather of her seat. The air between us shifted. I could see the fine lines at the corner of her eye, the faint pulse at her temple. I cupped my hand around my mouth, creating a tiny, intimate chamber of space, just as I had when I was a child sharing a secret on the school playground. My lips were inches from her ear. The whisper was so soft it was almost a breath, a vibration more than a sound, meant for her and her alone. It was a single sentence, a name, a question mark hanging in the perfumed air between us. Mom, I breathed, the word barely audible. I finally remember the man from the red dirt road. The effect was not instantaneous. It was geological. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The car continued its steady forward momentum. The sun continued to glint off the chrome trim. Then, I felt it. A minute tensing of the muscles in her shoulder where I touched it, a slight, almost imperceptible catch in her breathing, a hitch that broke the rhythm of the drive. Her knuckles, resting on the wheel, tightened, the skin pulling white over the bone. She didn't jerk the wheel. She didn't gasp or cry out. The change was far more profound, far more terrifying in its quiet intensity. It was as if I had not whispered a sentence, but thrown a switch that shut down the entire operating system of her being. The thoughtful, faraway look in her eyes vanished, replaced by a flat, focused stillness. She was suddenly, utterly present, and the air in the car crackled with the energy of that presence. Slowly, with the deliberate care that was more unnerving than any sudden movement could have been, she flicked on the turn signal. The rhythmic click-clack, Click-clack was a stark metronome in the sudden silence. She guided the car, not to the next exit which was still a speck in the distance, but onto the wide, gravel-strewn shoulder. The tires crunched over the loose stones, a sound like bones breaking, until we came to a complete stop, half on the asphalt, half on the dirt, shrouded in the long, deep shadows of the late afternoon. She shifted the car into park. The engine idled, a low, patient rumble. Only then did she turn her head to look at me. Her face, usually so open and readable to me, was a closed door. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as my own, searched mine, and in their depths, I saw something I had never seen before, a raw, unvarnished fear. "Say that again," she said, and her voice was not her own. It was low, stripped of all its usual warmth and melody, a voice from a hidden, fortified place inside her. The world outside the windshield seemed to hold its breath. The vast, empty fields, the distant, lonely clump of trees, the immense, cloud-dappled sky, it all felt like a stage set, waiting for her next line. And I, the playwright who had just unleashed a forgotten character, could only stare back, my own heart hammering against my ribs, realizing with a dawning, terrifying clarity that the whispered name I'd plucked from the murky depths of my memory was not just a forgotten fragment. It was a key. And I had just, without knowing it, unlocked a door I never knew existed, a door behind which lay my mother's deepest, most carefully guarded secret. The name was Samuel. Samuel Thorne. I didn't know it then, standing on the precipice of a truth that would reshape my entire understanding of my family, my mother, and myself, but that name was a ghost. It was a whisper from a life my mother had meticulously buried under 30 years of school runs, PTA meetings, family vacations, and the quiet, loving routine of her marriage to my father. It was a name tied to a place of red dirt and scorching sun, to a time of youth and rebellion and a love so fierce and catastrophic it had nearly broken her. My simple, whispered sentence was the first thread pulled, and as I looked into her eyes, wide with a storm of remembered pain and shock, I saw the entire tapestry of the life I knew begin to unravel. The trip was no longer just a visit to Grandma. It had become a journey into the heart of a mystery, a pilgrimage into my mother's past, and the quiet, humming car on the side of a forgotten highway was the starting line. The memory itself was a wisp, a fragment of a dream I'd carried for years without understanding its significance. It was sensory, not narrative. The feeling of fine, red powder coating my bare legs, the heat of a sun so intense it made the air shimmer, the smell of dust and dry grass. I was very small, 3, perhaps 4 years old. We were standing on a road that wasn't paved, a ribbon of packed crimson earth that cut through a landscape of towering, whispering pines. I was holding someone's hand. It was a large, calloused hand, not my father's soft, accountant's grip. And a man was kneeling before me, his face level with mine. He was smiling, but his eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, were sad. He had a beard, dark and rough-looking, and he wore a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He said my name, and then he said his. "I'm Samuel, kiddo. You remember that? Samuel Thorne." Then the memory dissolved, as childhood memories do, into the feeling of being lifted, the world tilting, and the sound of my mother's voice, tight and strained, saying, it's time to go. 4 decades, that was it. A meaningless snapshot in the album of my mind. I'd never mentioned it, never even thought to. It was like a single, stray puzzle piece from a box I'd never opened. But something about the rhythm of this drive, the quality of the silence, the way the light slanted across the fields, had dislodged it from its dusty corner and presented it to me, whole and inexplicably urgent. Now, as the reality of my mother's reaction crashed over me, the memory ceased to be a wisp. It solidified, gaining a terrible, new weight. Samuel Thorne, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper now, the confidence I'd felt moments ago completely evaporated. She closed her eyes. A long, slow breath escaped her lips, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. When she opened them again, they were glistening with unshed tears. The fear was still there, but it was now mingled with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, as if she had been running from this very moment for her entire adult life and had finally been caught. How, she asked, the single word laden with 1,000 other questions. How could you possibly remember that? I don't know, I stammered, my mind reeling. It's always been there. A fuzzy thing. The red dirt. His blue eyes. I never knew what it meant. I thought it was a dream. It wasn't a dream, she said, her voice hollow. She looked away from me, out at the endless fields, her gaze turning inward, traveling back across the miles and the years. It was a day I prayed you would forget. I built a whole life, a good life, on the foundation that you had forgotten. The confession hung in the air, stark and unbelievable. My mother, my pragmatic, sensible, crossword puzzle-solving mother, had a secret. A secret with a name. A secret she had built fortresses around. Who was he, Mom? I asked, my voice trembling. She was silent for a long time, so long I thought she might not answer. She just stared out at the horizon, where the sky was beginning to bleed into shades of orange and violet. The journey to Grandma's was forgotten. The world had shrunk to the confines of this car, to the space between our 2 seats. He was before your father, she began, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear. Before this life. Before I became who I am. She paused, gathering the scattered pieces of a story she had vowed never to tell. He was a storm. A beautiful, dangerous, summer storm. And I was just a girl who didn't know enough to come in from the rain. And so, there, on the shoulder of a forgotten highway, as the day died around us, my mother began to speak. The words started slowly, tentatively, like the first drops of rain before a deluge. She told me about being 18, growing up in a small, suffocating town in Georgia, a place where her future was already mapped out: marry a local boy, work at the diner or the bank, have 2.5 children, and slowly let her dreams curl at the edges like old photographs. She was Eleanor Dawson then, with the hunger for something more, a restlessness that the slow, syrupy pace of her life could not satisfy. She met Samuel Thorne at a roadside honky-tonk just over the state line, a place her parents would have forbidden her to go. He was older, 25 to her 18, and he wasn't from there. He was passing through, he said, doing odd jobs, working on a fishing boat out of Destin for a season. He had the look of a man who was comfortable with silence and wide open spaces. He played guitar with a raw, untrained talent that made the hairs on her arms stand up, and his eyes held a world weariness that she, in her youthful naivete, mistook for depth. It was like being caught in a riptide, she whispered, her fingers tracing an aimless pattern on the steering wheel. There was no fighting it. My parents hated him, of course. They said he was shiftless, a drifter, no good for me. And maybe they were right. But when you're 18, someone telling you no is just gasoline on the fire. She described the secret meetings, the stolen hours in his beat-up pickup truck, the way he'd talk about seeing the world, the red rock deserts of Arizona, the foggy coasts of Oregon. He offered an escape, a ticket out of the life she felt was suffocating her. He spoke of a freedom that was intoxicating. I was going to leave with him, she said, her voice thick with the memory of that reckless, passionate girl. I had a bag packed. We were going to drive to Florida, find work on the coast, live by the ocean. It was all planned. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. A month before they were set to leave, she discovered she was pregnant. With me. The air in the car grew heavy, charged with the gravity of this revelation. My entire origin story, the foundation of my existence, was shifting beneath me. The man I had called Dad my whole life, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had sat with me through math homework, whose gentle, steady presence was the bedrock of my childhood, was not my biological father. I told Samuel, she continued, her story gaining a desperate momentum now, as if a dam had broken inside her. I was so scared, but also, a part of me was happy. I thought it would cement things, make our plans more real. But he changed. The storm in Samuel Thorne, the one she had found so alluring, finally showed its destructive power. He was angry, scared. A baby wasn't part of his plan for freedom. He talked about taking care of it, using phrases that chilled her to the bone. They fought, terrible, screaming fights in the cramped cab of his truck. The man who had sung her sweet songs now hurled accusations and fears. The escape he offered began to look less like freedom and more like a prison. My parents found out about the pregnancy, she said, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. It was the biggest scandal our little town had seen in years. They were furious, humiliated. They gave me an ultimatum. I could stay, have the baby, and they would help me, but Samuel was to be out of the picture forever. Or I could leave with him and be dead to them. She was trapped, isolated, and terrified. The passionate love she felt for Samuel was being poisoned by his resentment and her own growing fear. The final break came on that red dirt road, the one from my memory. I told him I couldn't go with him. That I was staying. I thought. I don't know what I thought. That he'd fight for me, that he'd fall to his knees and promise to be a father, but he just got quiet. So quiet. He looked at me with those blue eyes, and all the light was gone from them. He said, "You're choosing this dead-end life, you're just like all the rest." He knelt down, right there in the dust, and he talked to you, to my belly. He said his name. I'll never forget it. He said, "You remember me, kid? I'm your dad. Samuel Thorne." And then he got in his truck and he drove away. I never saw him again. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of her breathing. 30 years of silence, shattered in 5 minutes on the side of a road. I went back to my parents, she whispered. I had you. It was hard. So hard. And then, a year later, I met your father Michael. He knew. He knew everything, and he didn't care. He loved me, and he loved you from the moment he met you. He adopted you, gave you his name, gave you his heart. He was your father in every way that mattered. We never spoke of Samuel again. We moved away. We started over. I became the person I am now. I buried Eleanor Dawson and the girl who loved Samuel Thorne in that red Georgia dirt. She turned to me then, her face a mask of anguish and pleading. You have to understand, sweetheart. I didn't lie to you. I was protecting you. I was protecting the beautiful, stable, happy life we built. Michael was your father. He is your father. Samuel was, a moment. A tragic, painful moment that gave me you. That's all he ever was. But it wasn't all. Not anymore. My whispered secret had resurrected him. It had given him substance, a history, a name. He was no longer a ghost, he was a man who had knelt in the dust and claimed me as his own. The implications began to crash over me like waves. My identity, which I had always taken for granted, was suddenly a question mark. The features I saw in the mirror, my dark, unruly hair, the slight cleft in my chin that my father didn't have, took on a new significance. They were not from my mother's side, as I'd always assumed. They were his. Samuel Thorne's. The trip was forgotten. The setting sun painted the interior of the car in fiery hues, but the world outside felt distant, unreal. We sat in silence for a long time, each of us grappling with the seismic shift that had just occurred. The hum of the engine was the only constant in a universe that had been fundamentally altered. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice raw but resolute. We can't go to Grandma's. Not like this. I nodded, numb. What do we do? She took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take when you're about to jump into deep, cold water. We turn around. We go home. Or. She hesitated, her eyes meeting mine, and in them, I saw a flicker of the desperate, 18-year-old girl she had once been. Or we keep going. But not to Grandma's. Where, I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. She looked out at the road ahead, the highway that stretched toward a future that was now terrifyingly unknown. South, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We go to Georgia. We go to that red dirt road. I don't know what we'll find. Maybe nothing. Maybe a ghost. But you've remembered him. After all this time, you've remembered him. And I think I owe it to both of us to find out why. And so, with a shared, unspoken understanding, my mother shifted the car back into drive. She checked her mirrors, signaled, and pulled back onto the asphalt. But we weren't heading north to Grandma's anymore. We were turning the car south, toward the past, toward the ghost of Samuel Thorne, toward the answers to questions I never knew I had. The whispered secret had set us on a new path, a detour into the heart of a long-buried truth, and as the car picked up speed, carrying us into the gathering twilight, I knew that nothing, not for me, not for my mother, not for the memory of the father I adored, would ever be the same again. The journey had just begun.